The planet was nothing more than dust and rock. Jack stood on the edge of the wreckage, scanning the horizon with a practiced eye. The mission was simple: find supplies, get out, and stay alive. He had done it hundreds of times before. But today, it was different today. There was something, or someone, he wasn't expecting. The ship had crash-landed hours before, its hull torn open, its contents scattered. Jack approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the dry ground. His hand rested lightly on the handle of his sidearm, but it wasn't a threat he was worried about. The planet was known for its hostile wildlife, but it wasn't the creatures. That had his attention now. It was the figure he saw lying motionless near the wreck. At first he thought it was just another part of the debris, maybe a part of the ship's frame, but as he got closer, he saw her. She was lying on the ground, barely moving, a strange figure unlike anything Jack had seen before. Her body was sleek, covered in a silvery suit that shimmered in the dim light of the setting sun. The helmet was cracked, and through the broken visor, he could see the faint outline of an alien face. He knelt beside her, his eyes scanning her suit. The woman, or whatever she was, didn't seem to react to his approach. Jack didn't know whether she was alive or just another casualty of the crash. He checked her pulse weak but still there. Relief flooded through him, and he quickly moved. To assess the damage, "Hey," he said softly, more to himself than to her, "I can help you." The alien woman's eyes flickered just for a moment. Jack froze, surprised by the brief connection. But it was clear she wasn't going to speak if she could even understand him. She wasn't moving much, and her breathing was shallow. Her suit was badly damaged, pieces of it hanging loose, exposing parts of her pale skin. Jack gently moved her arm, inspecting the injury. It looked like a deep burn, one that had scorched through the protective layer of her suit. Her left leg was bent awkwardly, and she had trouble supporting her weight. He cursed under his breath. There was no way she'd survive out here without help. "I've got you," Jack muttered, trying to keep his voice calm. He wasn't sure why he was so focused on helping her. Maybe it was because she was the only other living being he had seen for days. Maybe it was because of the way she looked at him with those tired eyes. Silently pleading for help, he removed his pack and began to work on her suit, carefully unhooking the damaged sections and pulling them away. His mind raced, thinking of the tools he had on him, the emergency medical supplies he'd need, the time it would take. But as he continued, he found himself thinking more about her, about who she was, where she came from, and why she was here. Despite his curiosity, Jack kept his focus on the task at hand. He wasn't trained to deal with aliens, but he knew enough to keep her alive. He needed to get her suit fixed and stabilize her condition before he could think about anything else. Her eyes stayed closed, but Jack could feel her watching him. He wasn't sure if it was a natural instinct or something more, but there was an undeniable presence about her. It was as if she were waiting for something. "Hang in there," Jack whispered, although he wasn't sure if she could hear him. He worked steadily, removing damaged armor and repairing her suit where he could. The process was slow, and his hands trembled slightly as he worked, the weight of her silence pressing on him. Minutes passed in uneasy quiet. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to ignore the heaviness in the air. He had repaired plenty of suits before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. He found himself wondering if the alien woman had a story, if she had a life before this crash. Did she have a family, a home? He paused for a moment, looking down at her. Her skin was almost translucent, with faint veins running through her limbs. She didn't look like any species Jack had encountered. Her features were delicate, soft, but there was something in the way she held herself that told him she was no stranger to hardship. Jack swallowed hard, shaking off the strange thoughts. He needed to finish the repairs. He needed to get her somewhere. Safe. Just as he was about to adjust the last piece of her suit, something unexpected happened. A single tear rolled down her cheek, slipping through the broken visor. It landed on Jack's hand, startling him. For a moment, everything stopped. He stared at the tear, not knowing what to say. The woman's eyes remained closed, and yet that one simple tear spoke volumes. It was like a small window into her soul, and Jack felt it, her pain, her loneliness, her fear. She had been through so much, yet all she had left was this fragile moment of vulnerability. He gently wiped the tear away, his hand trembling. It felt like an unspoken bond, a connection he wasn't prepared for. The alien woman, who had not spoken a word, had just shown him more emotion than most humans ever did. Jack didn't know what to do with that. He wasn't a doctor, and he wasn't a counselor. He was just a soldier. But that tear changed something inside him. He knew then that he couldn't leave her to die on this desolate planet. He had to keep her alive, even if it meant risking everything. "You're not alone," Jack said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here." The words hung in the air, but the alien woman remained silent. Her breath was steady, her chest rising and falling. She wasn't in pain anymore, not physical pain at least. But Jack knew this was just the beginning. There was a long way to go before she could be truly healed. As he finished the repairs, Jack couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would she thank him? Would she speak to him? Or would her silence remain, an impenetrable wall he couldn't breach? For now, though, Jack had done what he could. And as the stars began to twinkle above them, he realized that in this moment, he wasn't just saving her. She was changing him in ways he hadn't expected. The first night on the desolate planet passed slowly. Jack sat by the fire, watching the alien woman from across the room.
Ow.
Her helmet was off now, revealing more of her delicate features. Her hair was long and silver, almost glowing under the dim light. Her skin was smooth and almost translucent, but it was her eyes that caught Jack's attention the most. Those eyes, strangely beautiful and haunting, seemed to hold a lifetime of pain and secrets. She hadn't said a word since that single tear fell onto his hand. Jack couldn't stop thinking about it. The silence between them felt heavy, yet there was a strange comfort in it. Despite her silence, he didn't feel like he was alone. It was as if she was silently waiting for something. But what? He checked a small device in his hand, an emergency transmitter. No signal. He cursed softly. He had been hoping for a chance to contact the fleet, to get off this cursed planet, but it seemed that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. He looked back at her. She was sitting perfectly still, her back straight, as if in deep thought. Jack knew that he needed to do something. She had no way of surviving out here on her own, especially in that damaged suit. But helping her meant staying on this planet longer, which also meant his chances of survival were shrinking by the hour. The planet's harsh environment didn't leave much room for error. For a while, neither of them moved. Jack kept busy with his thoughts, working on fixing up the shelter, but his mind kept drifting back to her. Who was she? Why had she been out here alone? What was her story? He felt a sudden, overwhelming need to know. But every time he tried to speak, the words stuck in his throat. Wasn't even sure if she would understand him. Then he thought back to the moment when she shed that tear. It was clear now that something deep inside her had been broken, and maybe, just maybe, he could help her heal. But how could he do that when she wouldn't even speak? "Hey," Jack said softly, breaking the silence for the first time. "No, you probably don't want to talk, but I need to know what happened. You're not just a regular traveler, are you?" Her eyes moved toward him, and for the briefest of moments, Jack thought she might speak. Duh. But instead, she looked away. Focusing on the distant stars outside the shelter, he could see the faint shimmer of tears threatening to spill, but she didn't allow herself to cry. Her expression was unreadable. Jack sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and sympathy. He didn't know what to do. Maybe the silence between them was better. Maybe he didn't need answers from her to do what was right. He stood up and walked over to the small fire he had started. It wasn't much, but it gave them warmth, something Jack hadn't felt for what seemed like forever. He focused on the flames, watching as they danced and flickered in the cool night air. Do you want some food?" he asked, turning back to her. "It's not much, but I've got a few ration packs left." She didn't respond. Jack didn't press her. Instead, he sat down by the fire, eating his own meal in silence. The alien woman, still sitting motionless across the room, didn't seem hungry, and Jack respected that. She didn't want to eat, and that was fine. He wouldn't force her as well. He ate, His mind kept drifting to the wreckage they had both survived. How had she ended up here? What had she been through? Jack tried to imagine what kind of life she must have had before everything went wrong. He couldn't picture it. Silence told him there were things she couldn't or wouldn't say, but there was something about her that felt familiar. He didn't know if it was the way she looked at him, or how she seemed to understand his thoughts without words, but there was a connection between them. Jack couldn't explain it, but it was there. By the time the fire was reduced to a few glowing embers, Jack knew he had to sleep. The long day had taken its toll, and his body was beginning to ache from exhaustion. He glanced over at the woman, who was still sitting motionless. He was about to lie down when he heard a soft sound, a whisper almost inaudible, but it came from her. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Had she spoken? Had she finally said something? He stood up quickly, moving cautiously toward her. He knelt beside her, his face close to hers. "Did you say something?" Jack asked gently. She turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jack could feel his pulse quicken. She was about to speak, he was sure of it. But instead of words, she simply reached up and touched his hand. Her touch was light, as if she were testing the waters, unsure of herself. Jack didn't pull away. Instead, he stayed still, feeling the warmth of her hand against his. The gesture wasn't one of love or affection. It was something simpler, something more profound. She was reaching out, trying to communicate without words. It was as if she was saying, "Thank you. You're not like the others." Jack felt a sudden lump in his throat. He didn't know how to respond. How could he? Well, he was just a soldier. She was so much more. They stayed like that for a while, their hands touching but not moving. Jack didn't know what to say, and she didn't seem to expect anything from him. The silence between them had shifted. It wasn't as heavy now. There was a quiet understanding between them, even if they didn't have the words to express it. Eventually, Jack stood up, his hand lingering on hers for a moment longer than he intended. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew one thing. Whatever had brought them together, it wasn't by accident. "Get some rest," Jack said quietly. "We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow." The alien woman didn't respond. She simply closed her eyes, still sitting in the same position. Jack climbed into his makeshift bed and pulled the thin blanket over himself. His thoughts racing as he drifted off to sleep, he wondered what the future would hold for the two of them. He didn't know where their journey would lead or what challenges they would face. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel completely alone. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting its pale light over the desolate landscape. Jack stirred in his makeshift bed, stretching his sore muscles. The night had been long, and sleep had been hard to come by, with his mind constantly returning to the mysterious alien woman. He rubbed his eyes and stood up, looking across the shelter at her. She was sitting in the same spot where she had been the night before, her back straight and her gaze focused on the distant sky. She had hardly moved since they had shared that brief touch when she reached out to him in silence. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than what appeared on the surface. Her silence, her refusal to speak, it was as if she was carrying a burden far too heavy for one person to bear. Jack gathered his tools and started to work on his equipment. The wreckage outside still held valuable supplies, and he needed to figure out a way to repair his communication device. The longer they stayed here, the less chance they had of survival. He couldn't just sit here forever. After a while, Jack noticed the alien woman shifting slightly in her seat. She was still silent, but now there was something different in the air. Her movements were slower, more deliberate. He walked over to her, keeping his footsteps light. "I know you're not in the mood to talk," Jack said softly, "but I have to ask, what happened to you? Where did you come from?" Her eyes moved toward him, but she didn't speak. Jack sighed, sitting down beside her. He wanted to know more. The more he learned, the more he could help. But right now, all he had were questions with no answers. "I don't understand," Jack continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been through so much. Why won't you talk to me?" She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking with his. "Jack, froze. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of emotion, something he hadn't seen before. It wasn't anger or fear. It was
sadness.
deep, overwhelming sadness. Before Jack could say anything else, the alien woman slowly reached up and touched her face, wiping away a tear. The tear wasn't like the one that had fallen before. This time, it was more than just a sign of pain. It was a silent confession, a window into the heart of someone who had lost so much. Jack's heart tightened. In his chest, he reached out instinctively, his hand hovering above hers. "You don't have to hide it," Jack said, his voice gentle. "I know you've lost something. I can see it in your eyes, but you're not alone now. I'm here. I'll help you." She looked at him for a long time, her gaze filled with an unreadable mix of emotions, but she didn't speak. Instead, she reached out again, placing her hand in Jack's. This time her touch wasn't light, as it had been before. There was strength in Itan, unspoken trust, fragile bond that Jack wasn't sure he deserved. He stared at their hands, the alien woman's pale fingers intertwined with his. He had never imagined that a moment like this would come. He had always been alone, surviving on his own, never needing to rely on anyone. But now, sitting next to this alien, he realized that perhaps he wasn't as alone as he thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fighting for. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her silent words press against him. He didn't know what to do with all this connection, this unspoken understanding. He was still just a soldier, and she was still an alien. Their worlds were different, their lives unconnected in every way except for this single moment in time. "Don't worry," Jack said softly, his voice filled with determination. "I'll make sure you're safe. I won't let you go through this alone." For a while they stayed like that, sitting together in the quiet shelter. Jack wasn't sure what had changed between them, but something had. She had allowed herself to show a little more of what was inside, even if she hadn't said a word. Jack knew that sometimes words weren't necessary to communicate. A touch, a glance could say more than anything else. After some time, Jack stood up, pulling himself away from the comforting warmth of her presence. He needed to focus. The repairs on the shelter were incomplete, and the longer they stayed here, the more dangerous it became. Couldn't afford to stay in this place forever. "We need to get moving," Jack said, turning his back to the woman. "The wreckage holds enough supplies to last us a while, but we can't stay here. We need to find a way off this planet." He began gathering his tools again, moving toward the wreckage with purpose. But as he walked away, he couldn't help but glance back at her. She was still watching him, her eyes fixed on him with that same silent intensity. Jack didn't know what the future held for them. But in that moment, he realized something important. This was more than just a mission to him. It was about something deeper. It was about connection and understanding, and maybe even healing. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he had a purpose beyond survival. As he stepped outside to begin the search for supplies, he promised himself one thing: he would get her out of here, no matter what it took. The sun was high in the sky when Jack returned to the shelter. The day was hot, the desert air dry and unforgiving. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, dragging his feet as he approached the makeshift shelter where the alien woman still waited. She had not moved since he left, but Jack could feel a shift in the air between them. Something had changed, something deeper than either of them could explain. He paused before the door, running a hand through his messy hair. His mind was still on the wreckage. The supplies he found were limited enough to get by for a little. Well, but they wouldn't last long. He needed to fix the communication device, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the alien woman. Her silence had become something familiar, but her tear, her one small tear, kept him up at night, echoing in his thoughts. Jack stepped into the shelter, glancing over at her. She was sitting by the fire now, her posture the same, calm, composed. But there was something about her that made Jack pause. There was still a wall between them, but it wasn't as thick as it used to be. Her eyes, though still distant, seemed to be searching for something in the quiet moments between them. He set down the small pack he had brought with him and walked over to where she sat. Her eyes followed him, but she didn't speak. Jack wasn't sure what to do. She hadn't spoken a word since they met, and each time he tried to get her to talk, she remained silent. It was as though she was locked in her own world, holding on to something too painful to share. Jack kneeled in front of her, feeling a mix of curiosity and frustration. He wanted to know what happened to her, why she was out here, what her people were like. But every time he asked, she either ignored the question or just looked away. He wasn't sure if she couldn't speak or if she just didn't want to, but he couldn't give up. Not now, not when there was still a chance to learn more about her. "Look," Jack began, his voice gentle. "I know you're not ready to talk, but I need to understand. I need to know what happened to you. I can't help if you won't let me in." For the first time, the alien woman's expression softened slightly. She didn't speak, but she did something that made Jack's heart race. She slowly reached out and touched his hand. It wasn't a casual touch. It wasn't the same as the brief contact from before. This time, her hand lingered on his, and for a moment, they just sat there in silence. Her fingers trembling slightly against his. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know what to say. Her touch was warm, but it felt like an unspoken plea. It was as if she was trying to tell him everything without saying a single word. Jack could feel the weight of her emotions pressing against him, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a soldier. He didn't feel like someone who had to fix everything. This moment, he felt like someone who was being trusted with something fragile. "I won't leave you," Jack said softly, his voice barely a whisper.
Whatever it is you're going through, I'll help you. You're not alone.
The woman's eyes filled with a sadness that was almost unbearable. Still, she remained silent. Jack felt the pressure of her gaze, the weight of all the things she hadn't said. He wished he could understand. He wished he could find the right words, but every time he tried, he felt like he was just grasping at shadows. They stayed like that for a long time, sitting together in the quiet, with no words between them. Jack wasn't sure if it was because she didn't have the words, or if she simply didn't trust him enough to speak. Either way, he didn't push her. He didn't want to force her into something she wasn't ready for. Instead, he sat beside her, letting the silence hang in the air. He could feel the pull of her presence, the strange connection that seemed to grow stronger with every passing minute. Her sadness was still there, but so was something else, something Jack couldn't quite place. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was a silent plea for help. Hours passed. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm orange glow across the shelter. Jack stood up and moved to the small stove he had set up earlier. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cook. Simple meal. He had ration packs, but he didn't think they were enough for both of them to survive long term. They needed to find more food, more supplies, and soon. The alien woman didn't move. She stayed where she was, her eyes fixed on the fire. Jack set to work preparing something simple, canned food, nothing fancy. He wasn't sure if she'd eat, but he figured it was worth a try. As he cooked, he couldn't help but glance over at her. Every time their eyes met, he felt like he was being drawn in. There was something magnetic about her, something he couldn't explain. "I don't know what to say," Jack said, finally breaking the silence again. "I wish I could help you. I wish I could make things better." The alien woman's eyes flickered toward him for a brief moment, and Jack thought he saw something in them. It wasn't pity, it wasn't sympathy. It was something else, something that made his heart skip a beat. It was a recognition, like she understood what he was trying to say. But she still didn't speak. Jack took a deep breath, pushing aside the frustration that threatened to rise in him. He couldn't force her to talk. He couldn't rush her healing. All he could do was stay by her side and be patient. As the evening wore on, Jack finished preparing the meal and brought it over to her. He sat down beside her, offering her the food. "I don't know if you're hungry," he said, "but I thought you might want some. You've been through a lot, and we need to stay strong if we're going to get out of here." The woman looked at the food for a moment, then back at Jack. She still didn't speak, but she reached out and took the plate from his hands. Her fingers brushed against his again, and Jack felt a small jolt of electricity at the touch. She didn't eat immediately, though. She just held the plate, staring at it as if she were lost in thought. Jack didn't push her to eat. He just sat beside her, watching the stars start to appear in the dark sky outside. The night was quiet, but Jack could feel the weight of everything that was left unsaid between them. The days passed, each one blurring into the next, as Jack and the alien woman settled into a routine. Jack did what he could to keep them both alive, repairing the shelter, gathering supplies from the wreckage, and trying to fix his communication device. But nothing seemed to be enough. The harsh conditions of the planet were unforgiving, and the supplies they had were running low faster than Jack had hoped. He couldn't stay here forever, and neither could she. The alien woman, who had remained silent since the beginning, seemed to be growing more restless each day. She spent long hours staring at the sky or at the horizon, her expression distant. Jack knew that she was thinking about something that she wasn't willing to share with him. But the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It had become a part of their daily life, something they both learned to live with still. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing. He wanted to know her story, wanted to understand what had brought her to this planet and what had happened to her people. But every time he tried to ask, she just looked away, her eyes filled with sadness. It was clear that whatever had happened to her, it was something she wasn't ready to talk about. One morning, after another failed attempt to repair his communication device, Jack sat down by the fire, exhausted. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed. He had no idea what to do next. His options were limited. Stay on this planet and wait for help that might never come, or try to find a way off the planet on his own. Neither option seemed promising. "Hey," Jack said, looking over at the alien woman, who was sitting in her usual spot, staring off into the distance. "I know you don't want to talk, but I need you to understand something. We can't stay here forever. I'm running out of time, and I'm running out of supplies." The alien woman didn't respond. She just kept looking ahead, her eyes focused on something Jack couldn't see. Jack bit his lip, frustrated. He didn't know what to do anymore. He wasn't used to being in this situation. He was a soldier, a fighter, and he wasn't trained for this kind of uncertainty. "I don't know what happened to you," Jack continued, his voice softer now, "but I know you've been through something ... something terrible, and I get it. But if we're going to get out of here, we need to stick together. Can't do this alone." Still there was no response. Jack stood up and began pacing around the shelter, his thoughts racing. What if he couldn't get her to trust him? What if she was too broken to move on? He didn't know how to help her, and that was starting to eat at him. But then, as if the universe had decided to answer his thoughts, there was a faint sound in the distance. Jack froze. It was barely audible, but he knew it wasn't the wind or an animal. It was the sound of something mechanical, a ship, or maybe a vehicle of some kind. His heart skipped a beat. Oh, was this it? Was help finally coming? He grabbed his binoculars and scanned the horizon. There, in the distance, a faint trail of smoke was rising into the sky. Someone, or something, was coming toward them without thinking. Jack grabbed his pack and rushed to the alien woman's side. He shook her gently, trying to get her attention. "We need to move," Jack said urgently. "Someone is coming. I don't know who, but we need to go now." The alien woman's eyes met his, and for the first time in days, Jack saw something. In them hope. It was only a flicker, but it was enough. She stood up, her movements slow but determined, and followed Jack as he made his way toward the wreckage. Jack didn't know if this was the help they had been waiting for, or if it was another dangerous situation, but he couldn't afford to wait and find out. He had to act quickly. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't hesitate. The two of them ran toward the wreckage, Jack keeping a careful eye on the approaching trail of smoke. The terrain was rough, but Jack knew this planet well enough to navigate it quickly. The alien woman kept pace with him, her eyes focused ahead, her steps steady. Jack didn't know what had changed, but something was different. She was moving with purpose, and for the first time Jack felt like they were truly working together as they neared the wreckage. Jack stopped and hid behind a large piece of debris. He motioned for the alien woman to do the same. She crouched. Down beside him, her breathing steady but quick. They waited in silence. The tension building as the sound of the approaching vehicle grew louder. Jack's heart raced. Whoever was coming, they were close now. He had no idea what to expect, but he wasn't going to let them get the jump on him. He needed to be ready. After what felt like an eternity, the vehicle appeared in the distance. Small, battered craft, not unlike the one Jack had arrived in. It was flying low, kicking up dust as it approached. Jack's pulse quickened. Was it a rescue team? A group of survivors? Or was it someone else? The craft landed with a loud thud, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Jack and the alien woman stayed hidden, watching as a group of figures climbed out. There were at least 5 of them humans by the looks of it, but their gear was unfamiliar. They were armed, their weapons holstered, but ready. Jack's mind raced. Should he approach them? Should he wait? He glanced over at the alien woman. She was tense, her body language showing signs of fear. Whatever these people were, they weren't what Jack had been hoping for. He could see it in her eyes. This wasn't a rescue. It was something else. Stay here, Jack whispered to her. I'll find out what they want. He stood slowly, moving cautiously toward the group of figures. His hand rested on his sidearm, but he didn't draw it yet. He needed information, not a fight. As he got closer, he could hear their voices. They were speaking in low tones, but Jack could make out a few words. They were talking about the wreckage, the resources, and something about clearing out the area. Jack's stomach dropped. These weren't survivors. They weren't here to help. They were scavengers. The group of scavengers stood just a few meters away from Jack and the alien woman, their voices low but clear enough to make out their words. Jack's stomach twisted as he listened to their plans. They didn't care about the wreckage or the supplies. What they wanted was something far more dangerous. These ruins are full of old tech, one of the scavengers muttered. We can sell it, make a fortune. We're going to need to move fast, though, before anyone else shows up. Jack's mind raced. These men and women weren't here to rescue him, and they definitely weren't here to help the alien woman. They were here for their own gain, willing to take anything they could find, no matter who stood in their way. His eyes darted over to the alien woman, still crouched behind the wreckage, her expression unreadable. Jack could see the faint flicker of fear in her eyes, but there was also something else, something familiar, a spark of hope. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, for the chance to act, to take control of her own fate once again. Jack had to make a decision. He couldn't let these scavengers get their hands on her. They wouldn't understand what she had been through, and they wouldn't care. He had promised to protect her, and that promise meant more than his survival. She was a survivor, too. She was strong, and she could make it through this if she had a chance. He took a deep breath, his mind made up. They couldn't stay hidden forever, and the scavengers would be moving in soon. If Jack and the alien woman were going to escape, they needed to act quickly. Stay close, Jack whispered to her. He didn't wait for a response. He could feel her watching him, feeling his every move, even though they hadn't exchanged many words. There was an understanding between them now, a bond built not on words but on the shared experience of survival. The alien woman stood up slowly, her body tense but ready. Jack could see that she was no longer the fragile, broken figure from days ago. She was standing tall now, like a warrior preparing for a fight. Her eyes were focused, her movements sharp and deliberate. The scavengers were still distracted, talking among themselves as they prepared to start their search for valuable tech. They didn't see Jack and the alien woman slipping past them, moving silently through the debris. Jack kept low, his hand resting on his sidearm, but he didn't draw it just yet. He had a plan, and the last thing he wanted was to start a fight. If he didn't have to, they made their way toward the edge of the wreckage, sticking to the shadows as they moved. Jack glanced back to check on the scavengers. They were still busy, unaware of the danger coming their way. It was their mistake. And the alien woman made it to a small rise in the terrain, a place where they could see the scavengers without being seen. Jack crouched down, scanning the area. They were close now, close enough to see that the scavengers had started to move in on the wreckage. They were getting ready to begin their search, but they were still disorganized, still talking amongst themselves. Jack turned to the alien woman, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, everything seemed to fall silent. He could feel her presence beside him, a sense of calm and quiet strength radiating from her. She was ready for whatever came next. "We move now," Jack said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. He didn't wait for her to respond, knowing that she understood. With quick, decisive movements, they stood up and sprinted toward the scavenger's vehicle. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. They had no time to waste. They couldn't afford to wait for the scavengers to notice them. They needed to take control of the situation now. The alien woman was right beside him, her speed matching his, her movements almost graceful despite the harsh terrain. Jack felt a surge of admiration for her. She wasn't just a survivor, was a fighter, and together they could take on whatever came their way. As they neared the scavenger's vehicle, Jack felt the tension in the air. The vehicle was their only way off the planet, and Jack knew that if they could get to it, they might just have a chance to escape. But it wasn't going to be easy. Scavengers were armed, and they wouldn't let anyone just take their equipment. Jack drew his sidearm, taking a deep breath. He had to be careful. The last thing he wanted was a full-blown fight. But if it came to that, he was ready. When they were within range, Jack turned to the alien woman and gave her a quick nod. It was time. They moved quickly, taking advantage of the chaos the scavengers had caused with their disorganized searching. Jack fired a shot into the air, not aimed at anyone, but just enough to grab their attention. The scavengers froze, looking around in confusion. It was exactly what Jack needed. "Hey," Jack shouted, his voice carrying across the open space. "I need to talk to you." The scavengers turned toward him, their eyes narrowing. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his face, raised his weapon, clearly ready for a fight. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't have time to play games. "I'm not here to fight," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I need that ship, and I need it now. You're not leaving with anything." The scavenger with the scar laughed, shaking his head. "You think you can just take it from us?" he sneered. "You're outnumbered, soldier." Jack's fingers tightened around his sidearm. He wasn't going to back down, wasn't going to let them win. "I'm not asking," Jack said, his voice cold. "Get out of the way."
Ow.
The tension between them hung in the air like a storm, waiting to break. Scavengers didn't move, their hands tightening on their weapons, ready for a fight. But Jack wasn't afraid. He had one advantage: the alien woman. He glanced over at her, his heart pounding in his chest. She was ready. With a sudden explosive motion, Jack moved, firing a shot at the ground near the scavenger with the scar. It was enough to send them into a panic. The alien woman was on the move instantly, darting past Jack, faster than anyone could react. The fight was on.